Hello to everyone here today. My name is Sister Eleanor. I'm a member of the Teo community of Interfaith Franciscans. Thank you for the sound and vision check, Brother Sean. I'd like to welcome you all today to my second talk on Brother Lawrence. Just as a recap, before we say our peace prayer, Brother Lawrence, we recapped last time, was a man who was born, I believe it was in the 1600s, and he was a member of the army at some point and fought in war. And after he got out of the army, he became a footman to a nobleman. And through a conversion experience, a very simple conversion experience that I think kind of marked the rest of his life, which it did mark the rest of his life, he then entered the community of decaused Carmelites. And it was there that he spent the rest of his life. Now, when I say that his conversion experience actually marked the rest of his life, what I'm basically saying is his conversion experience simply became looking at a tree. It was simply looking at a tree and seeing the bare branches of the tree and realizing that in spring and summer, God would again allow this tree to flower and become fruitful. And from that, he realized that the providence of God pervaded everything. And that was his conversion experience. And that is a very simple conversion experience. There's a lot of people when they are converted from doing things that, not necessarily an incredibly sinful life, but in not putting God first in their life, and putting too much emphasis into things and too much emphasis into situations around them, they have like visions and they have angels coming to them and all this other stuff. But Brother Lawrence just simply saw a tree that was barren because it was wintertime or the end of fall. And then he realized that God provided for it to become fruitful again. And I believe that, like I said, that not only characterized his conversion, but his whole life, in so much as, again, it was a very simple experience. And it was to actually a conversion experience that provided simplicity of life for the rest of his life. It was a conversion experience that characterized his life and his lifestyle. So we also want to say that Brother Lawrence did not write a book, but he had many letters that he had conversed with other people, giving them counsel. He had visits with other people that he was, I would say, a spiritual counselor to. And from all of these letters and notes that he had written came a book after that. It was a compilation of all of these letters and everything. And this is the book that we have today, The Practice of the Presence of God, by Brother Lawrence. So it was really just telling other people about his life, what he experienced firsthand. And he tried to tell other people what worked for them, and that maybe they would consider that his experiences and that it might work for them as well. So this is my whole hope today of, and in the future with Brother Lawrence, because we'll have a few more talks, to actually hope that you might consider some of the things that Brother Lawrence said and did, and that they might be applied to your life as well, so that you may deepen your spirituality and, most of all, deepen your relationship with our Father, Mother, God. So let us begin. We have our candle that's lit for peace. Again, I'm saying this all the time in prayer and also in any presentation, that this, again, to exemplify the spirit of Brother Lawrence, is a simple white candle and a single flame. So we're going for the simplicity. We're being mindful in the flame and the white candle of the simplicity of Brother Lawrence as a hallmark that should be possibly for our lives. Now, I'm not saying that you should adopt the spirituality of Brother Lawrence. What I'm saying is you could take a lot of the things that he did and apply it to your own life in your own way. I am actually an advocate of taking what others profess or what others do, and actually taking that and making it an expression of your life. It's not that we want to be another Brother Lawrence or another Teresa of Avila if we ever could be, or another St. Catherine or another this or that, another Gandhi. What we want to do is we want to take a lot of the principles that they imbued and then make them our own so that we can express these principles in our own way. We are meant to be the best possible us's, okay, the best possible Sister Eleanor, the best possible Brother Sean, and whoever else is here today not logged in. You're meant to be that best self that you can be. That is your expression of God here on this earth. So anyway, this is the second conversation that Brother Lawrence had with this particular gentleman who was coming obviously to see him for spiritual counsel. Brother Lawrence said that he had always been governed by love without thought of himself. He resolved to make the love of God the goal of all of his actions. He had become satisfied that this method was the best path. He was pleased when he could pick up a straw from the ground for the love of God, seeking only him and nothing else, not even his gifts. What a beautiful statement that is. A beautiful statement that not only would you be able to pick a straw off the ground for the love of God, but you wouldn't expect anything in return. It's not like you're doing anything hoping that God will give you multiple blessings. It's a wonderful thing if our God does give us multiple blessings. But how beautiful is that you could actually do something for the love of God, just simply for the love of God, not expecting any wonderful thing in return. After all, when you love someone on earth, when you really truly love someone, you do things for them, not expecting that they're going to do things for you in return. You simply do them because you love the person. Same it is with God. That Brother Lawrence did things because he just simply loved God and wanted to show God how much he loved him. For a long time, Brother Lawrence was troubled by the thought that he would be damned. No one in the world could have persuaded him otherwise, but then he reasoned within himself in this manner. I did not enter into the religious life for any reason except the love of God, and I have endeavored to live only for him. Therefore, whatever becomes of me after death, whether I am lost or saved, I will always continue to act purely for the love of God. I shall have this consolation at last, that till death I shall have done all that is in me to love him. Again, many times in life we have what you might call the dark night of the soul, and it seems like as we spiritually ascend, as we get closer to God, something within us gives us this dark night of the soul, which for Brother Lawrence was that he thought he would be damned. But then the most beautiful thing about this is also that he reasoned that what he was doing, why he entered religious life and why he lived his life, was for the love of God. So in this complete surrender, he basically said, no matter what happens to me, whether I'm damned or I go to heaven or whatever happens to me after death, my consolation will be that I did everything and I lived for the love of God. So again, he's not thinking of what's going to happen to him. He's not performing acts of love for God. He's not loving God just because that's the way I'll go to heaven. He's doing it simply because God is God and he loves God and he has a relationship with God. The troubled state of mind of feeling that he would be damned lasted for about 4 years, during which he suffered greatly. But since that time he has lived his life in perfect liberty and continual joy. He placed his sins between him and God, as it were, telling God that he did not deserve his kindnesses, but God still continued to bestow them upon him in abundance. So again, yes, he did suffer because, of course, in your mind, as he said, he had this feeling he was going to be damned. But at the same time, he reasoned that he was just living for the love of God, and that was going to be the pervasive act or the pervasive thought in his life. That no matter what happens, he was just going to love God purely. And God continued to bestow blessings and kindnesses on him in abundance. In order to form a habit of communing with God continually and committing everything we do to him, he says we must at first make a special effort. After a while, we find that his love inwardly inspires us to do all things for him effortlessly. It always goes back to trust and surrender. Love is trust and surrender. When you love someone in this lifetime, it's a trust and surrender effort. So he tried to commune with God and commit everything he did to God continually. And again, before you do any of that, you have to say yes to it. With all of these things that you want to do, you have to make the beginning of really saying to yourself, this is what I want to do. This is how I want to do it. And I say yes to God's efforts within myself to do this. Because remember, without God, you can do nothing. So God gives you the grace in order to exert that special effort to love him. And then from there, it's a cyclic effect. You love him, he loves you back, and the more and more it grows. And he inspires you to do things, and it becomes effortless eventually. He expected also, Brother Lawrence, that after all the pleasant days God has given him, that he would have his share of pain and suffering. Now that's a very human thing, a very human consideration. We always think, we almost feel like we don't deserve all this happiness. If you have days and days of happiness, you think, oh, now there has to be something else going on. I have to have some suffering because I can't have all this happiness. I don't deserve it. So Brother Lawrence, as far advanced as he was spiritually, also felt the same way, as we do. I know I do from time to time. You think, oh, I can't possibly have continual happiness. I have to have something else now that is not so happy. So he felt the same way. But he was not concerned about it. Again, he left everything over to God. He knew very well that he could do nothing by himself, and God would not fail to give him the strength to bear any suffering he might have. As it is said over and over in the Bible, God's grace is sufficient. It was sufficient for Paul, who went around and preached the gospel to all different lands, Greece, etc. And it was sufficient to many others in the gospel, and it's sufficient to all that were in the gospel and in the Bible. That whatever God would allow to happen in your life that was not so good, God's grace would just hold you up and allow you to continue despite everything that happened. And the wonderful thing, again, about Brother Lawrence is that he was not concerned about it. He was not concerned that if trials and tribulations come, God would provide. Again, going back to his conversion experience with the tree, the barren tree. When an occasion rose to exercise some virtue, he committed himself to God, saying, Lord, I cannot do this unless you enable me. Everything that he started, some virtue, some good thing that he started, he said, I cannot do this, Lord, unless you enable me. I cannot do this without your help. Then he received more than sufficient strength. So God then just answered his prayer simply. You ask me, Brother Lawrence, for the grace to enable you to do this, and so I give it to you. When he failed in his duty, he simply confessed his fault to God, saying, I shall never do otherwise if you leave me to myself. You must stop my falling and fix what is amiss in me. Having prayed in this manner, he gave it no further thought. So you can see how he looked to God for everything in his life. He didn't beat himself up like many of us do. If we fall in some way, if we do something that's not godlike, that's not good, if we do something that's, a little against God in some way, it doesn't have to be a big thing, but we tend to beat ourselves up as if it were a big thing. But Brother Lawrence simply looked to God and said, if I'm left to my own devices, I'll continue to do this. So you have to fix what's wrong with me and help me. And God helped him. Imagine that. Imagine that. We ask God for help and he helps you. Because God wants us to have happy lives. God wants us to live our life in contentment and joy. We have been so brainwashed to the other end that our life is full of suffering, and you've heard it over and over again. Your life is full of suffering and then you die. But it wasn't ever meant to be this way. And so God, when you ask for help, helps you to make differences in your life, helps you to change things. If your mindset is a certain way, he helps you to fix your mindset so that it's not so gloomy or doom or whatever it happens to be. And all you have to do is ask. Truly ask. Now, sometimes you can ask, but there's a part of you that really doesn't want it to change. And that's different. Then you can always ask God, please, there's part of me that doesn't want to change. Take that away. So you just have to ask God in whatever situation it is and however you know yourself to be. And then ask him, change this for me, dear Lord. Fix this for me. I can't do this by myself. Part of me doesn't want to change. Help me to fix that part that doesn't want to change. So Brother Lawrence said that we ought to relate to God in the greatest of simplicities, speaking to him frankly and plainly, and imploring his assistance in our affairs as they happen. In his experience, God never failed to grant help. So we talk to God like we would talk to our neighbor. We would talk to our friend. We just say, Lord, I'm in this situation. Lord, this has happened to me right now. Just please help me in this. However you want to say it. We get so involved in saying things certain ways or being afraid that if we don't say it a certain way that God will not reward us, or he will not do things for us, or he will think we're, quote, bad people, or whatever it happens to be. You just really have to speak to God very plainly. After all, God knows already what's in your heart anyway, so just speak to him plainly and then go from there. And tell him, as it happens, how you want him to help you. Brother Lawrence recently was sent into Burgundy to buy a quantity of wine for the monastery. This was a very unwelcome task for him, because he had no head for business. Furthermore, he was lame, and he could not move around in the boat that he was traveling in, except by rolling himself over the casks. However, he did not bother himself about it, nor about the purchase of the wine. He said to God that it was his business he was on, that he found that he did the job very well after he had said that. He had been sent to Auvergne last year on the same business, and it also seemed to work out well. So again, he didn't think about it too much. He didn't obsess over it like I have a tendency to. Well, what's going to happen when I go here, and how am I going to do this, and how am I going to do that? He just simply went about the task and asked God's help. And lo and behold, God's help came for him. The same was true of his work in the kitchen, to which he had a natural aversion. He proceeded to do everything there for the love of God, praying continually for God's grace to do his work well. In this manner, he had found everything easy during the 15 years that he was employed there. He did everything for the love of God, praying continually for God's grace to do this work well, even though he had an aversion to it. And in that way, from what I read, By doing this, eventually the aversion that he so did not want to take part in became a joy for him. How beautiful could it be if the work that we have in our lives that's an aversion or anything that is something that we do not want to do, we could do with joy because we proceeded to do everything for God's love and actually asking for God's grace to do whatever it is well. It's very simple. And sometimes the things that we read about and the techniques that people have, like Brother Lawrence and all this, it's so simple, it's almost like unbelievable that it can be that simple and work. But I do believe that God wants his relationship with us to be simple, not complex. As I said, after all, he knows our very hearts. So we don't have to say fancy words or, look a certain way or say things a certain way because God already knows what's there. You don't have to try to put on a mask for God because God already knows what's there in your heart. Brother Lawrence was very pleased with the position he was now in, but he was as ready to leave this job if it came to that. He always enjoyed himself no matter what he was doing because he did everything, even the smallest things, for the love of God. So it didn't matter if he was in that position or another position or any position. Anything that he had to do in the monastery he was content with because everything was done for the love of God. The set times of prayer were no different for him than other times. He secluded himself to pray according to the directions of his superior, but he did not need such solitude, nor did he ask for it. Even the busiest work did not distract him from his communion with God. That is the deep center that I always talk about in prayer, that deep, peaceful center where it's just you and God. If we could only tap into that 24/7, which we can by practicing what Brother Lawrence practiced, by being aware of God's presence, by committing everything that you do to him and for him, for his love, for the love of God, and then just by giving it all over and surrendering in trust. Trust that God will take care of even the smallest matter. He knew that he had an obligation to love God in all things, and he endeavored to do so. Therefore, he felt like he had no need of a spiritual director to advise him, but he very much needed a confessor to absolve him. He was very aware of his faults, but he was not discouraged by them. He confessed them to God, but did not plead with him to excuse them. When he had finished confession, he gently resumed his normal practice of love and adoration. So he did not become discouraged by the fact that he had faults. He just simply acknowledged them, confessed them to God, and realized that God would take care of everything. When he was troubled, he consulted no one. He knew by the light of faith that God was present, and he contented himself with directing all of his actions to him. He did everything with the intent to please God and did not worry about the consequences. Useless thoughts spoil everything, he said. All trouble began there. We ought to let go of such thoughts as soon as we are aware of them. They are worthless to either life or salvation. We should quickly return to our communion with God. So useless thoughts spoil everything. And boy, do we have useless thoughts. I know I do. Now, I have a thought that comes and it just constantly rolls around in your head and then you get embroiled in it. It's better than to leave that thought go and to go back to the presence of God. The communion with God. At the beginning, he had often used his appointed time of prayer by rejecting wandering thoughts and falling back into them. But he could never regulate his devotional life by using spiritual disciplines the way some people do. He would start off by meditating for a while and then set it aside and resume his natural relationship with God in a manner that he could not describe. And of course, Brother Lawrence could not describe it because it was his relationship. Just like each and every one of you that are here present today, whether you use these principles or not, you cannot really describe your relationship with God. It's simply something between you and God. It's like when you, again, are in love with somebody here on earth, you can't really describe the relationship that you have. You might say it's this, this, and this, but the deeper part of the relationship is indescribable. And it's the same way with your relationship with God. Brother Lawrence said that all bodily spiritual disciplines and exercises are useless. All that is needed to bring us to union with God is love. He had pondered this subject much and concluded that the shortest way to God was to go straight to him by a continual exercise of love and doing everything for his sake. So again, it was very simple. He did not have to say certain prayers over and over again, certain times of the week, certain days of the year, which is all well and good. I'm certainly not saying that these things should not be done. If they lead you to loving God and practicing a more simple relationship with God that is bound strictly by love and trust and surrender, then that is all well and good. But he felt he could just go directly to God and just have the relationship with God, which was doing everything for God's sake in love. It is important to discern the difference between acts of the understanding and those of the will. Understanding with the mind is of little value. The intent of the heart is all important. We should concern ourselves only with loving and delighting ourselves in God. The intent of the heart is all important. And that is a very important statement. The intent of the heart means everything. What you intend to do, what you intend to offer to God, what you intend to offer of yourself, how you intend to say yes to God. All of these things that flow from your heart are the most important things in all the universe. It doesn't matter if you have planets or solar systems or whatever. The most important thing is love. And the love that comes from the intent of your heart is the most important of all and the most powerful of all. All kinds, he said, of spiritual disciplines, if they are void of the love of God, cannot remove a single sin from our lives. So we could say prayer upon prayer upon prayer. And as I said, I'm not saying that these things should not be done. Just like in the Eastern thought, you say a million mantras to achieve a certain thing. And that is all well and good as well. But even beyond all of that, okay, even beyond, they're almost all exterior type of things. What you get to when you get to the internal truth of the matter is the love between you and God again. He said we should without anxiety accept that all of our sins have been forgiven by the blood of Jesus Christ. And definitely so. No matter, I believe, no matter what you are as far as your tradition or your denomination or whatever it is, Jesus Christ came to save everyone, to forgive everybody's sins, to forgive all the imperfections of everybody in this world. It didn't say that Jesus Christ came only for Christians or came only for Jews or came only for whoever. Jesus Christ came to forgive the sins, the imperfections, all those things to prevent us from being our best selves in the eyes of God, and for leading us along that best path that leads to complete union with God. Jesus Christ died for that. From this perspective, we are free to seek only to love Him with all our hearts. We can take comfort in the fact that God seems to grant the greatest grace to the greatest sinners as signs of his great mercy. So you shouldn't be anxious about your sins because they were already paid for. All you have to do is to just love God with all your heart. And that's all you have to do. You just commit yourself in the most simplest way to love God. Remember, he picked a straw off the floor for the love of God. He said that the greatest pains or pleasures of this world are not to be compared with what he had experienced of both kinds in the spiritual life. He worried about nothing, and he feared nothing. His only desire is not to offend God. And it's so singular and so almost pristine that he loved God in such a way and actually asked God, really, to allow him to love in such a way, because without God you can do nothing. It's a very pristine, a very pure kind of intent that Brother Lawrence had. He did not beat himself up when he sinned. He said, when I fail in my duty to God, I immediately acknowledge it, saying, all I do is sin, and I shall never do otherwise if I am left to myself. If I do something well, I give God thanks and acknowledge that every good that I do comes from him. So he just acknowledged what was wrong and committed it over to God and surrendered it to God. So this is where I'm going to stop for today, only because I feel that it's enough for us to try and grasp for right now. As you see, Brother Lawrence had a very simplistic faith, a very lovely type of relationship with God. It was based solely on love, not a lot of exterior things going on, not, saying hundreds of prayers at certain times of the day. As I said over and over, even these things are good. But it was just based upon trust, love, surrender, and asking God to help him in everything that he did, no matter what it was. And every day, going throughout the day, when something came up, he immediately asked God, like, how can I handle this now? What can you do for me to make this better? Can you help me by your grace to turn the situation around? So it wasn't like he just prayed like in the morning and then, which is fine, and then set his day, or prayed at night, which is also good. But he also continually asked God for help during the day. Like, say, for example, you're in the garden and, I don't know, maybe you're planting something in the garden. You can just say to God, I want this garden to be really good, and I want this garden to give glory to you. Would you help these seeds to grow? Would you help me to plant this a certain way so that it will grow properly? All kinds of things. You can think of a million situations off the top of your head. So we're going to continue with Brother Lawrence next week and see what else he has in store for us and see what else he can tell us. I'm sorry I forgot to pray our peace prayer tonight at the beginning. But I will now ask for the peace of Brother Lawrence to come into all of our lives. The peace of knowing that we're loved by God and that no matter what we do, God forgives us, and all we have to do is turn to him. All we have to do is have the intent from the very heart of ourselves to love God, and he enables us to do so, and it just goes from there. We receive many blessings, but like I said, Brother Lawrence didn't look for blessings. He did it out of pure intent, the purest intent of loving God, which is the most beautiful thing of all. So I thank you for being with me today. I hope you will be with me again next Wednesday when we again have another talk about Brother Lawrence. And love you all, and hope you can be here again, as I said. All right. Thank you so much. Namaste.